I'm Jamie Bennett. I'm the executive director of ArtPlace. And this is, yeah, you can clap for that. That's worth clapping. And I say this sentence a lot, but today I actually mean it. This is my favorite thing that I'm going to do this year. And I spent 3-4 years working in local city government. And I loved that work because I was part of the community that I worked in. So if I did a good job Monday through Friday, I had better nights and weekends. And then I went and spent 4 years working at the federal government. And that's hugely important work, but you're often working with communities on behalf of communities that you're never a part of. And so at ArtPlace, where we work nationally, is a lot like that sort of federal government work. But this is the one time of the year that we actually get our community together and get us all in one place. So it means a huge amount to us to have all of you guys here. So I'm just hugely excited about that. And then the first thing I wanted to do is essentially say that place-based work, the fundamental tenet of that is that we actually understand that the places that we're working in. So before we did anything further, I wanted to invite a colleague up. We're lucky enough to have a colleague, Mike Tooley, with us, who is the newly, as of 6 weeks ago? Newly appointed executive director of the United Indians of All Tribes Foundation. And he'll actually be hosting us tomorrow night at the Daybreak Star Cultural Center. So we'll get to see some of the wonderful work that they're doing in person. But I wanted to sort of invite Mike up to welcome us to this place and to ground us in a little bit of the history of the, 11,000 years that people have been gathering here in this place. So with that, please join me in making Mike feel welcome. Mike Tooley.
I'd like to start out with my my mother's tongue. Sheikh Fatwe in mi khatwe ku nai muma ku yanchima kwashanash tutisha emi pine wanikshash kushiash in meepshit iwanikshash Reggie in meepsha iwanikshash Agnes outmish Bayu Prisha, Tlauch, Mamiauch, Auch, Laki, Naknawisha, Mais Chwais, Mishkin, Auyat, Subsequata, Mianish Mamen, Aunet, Tlauch, Awa Pitata, Mianish Mamen. Aye. What I said was hello. Just kidding. Actually, what I said was I just want to say good evening, and I welcome all of my friends and maybe some relatives and some of you elders, you old-timers here. Just want to give you a nice, warm welcome. I stand before you very honored. Part of the reason I'm here is because I'm really constantly worried about our future of our whole environment. I feel like the world is changing, and there are many items that need to be addressed. And working together, people like you and me could make a better life for everybody, especially in the natural environment world, through education and through resources. And that's what I said, essentially. But anyway, I just wanted to, again, welcome you. Thanks to Jamie. A little bit of a history about Seattle and Native Americans. There's a very rich culture here. There's been numerous tribes. They were all essentially the same people, known as Coast Salish in this immediate area. Almost the same exact dialect. In this particular area standing on right now, it was inhabited by the people known as Suquamish and Duwamish. Very richly cultured people, very grounded in their everyday items. A fellow was by the name of Self, and it was pronounced Sia. And eventually it became anglicized, and one day a fellow named Doc Maynard convinced everybody to change it to Seattle. So just so you know, the real name of this place is Self. So just for future reference. And the years were not very pleasant for Native Americans, unfortunately, in this area. As the years passed by from year 1805 all the way to about 1855, Native Americans lost about 90% of their population base due to disease, mumps, measles, and the yellow fever, things that probably, today's world, you wouldn't think twice about it. You just rest and you get healthy. But in them days, they didn't have any immunity towards these particulars, and so they succumbed to them, unfortunately. In fact, when the Columbus first landed in the North America area, there was estimated there were anywhere from 30 million up to 50 million Native Americans inhabited this continent. By the year 1900, they were down to 250,000. Today, that number is still rather small. United States right now has come up to about 325 million, and the native population on this continent is right around about 3.2 million. And so the numbers are still quite small. Constitutes probably less than 1% of the base. So moving along with the natives in this particular area, there was a lot of pressures had been put on these natives in this area to move out of this area. Eventually, right around about 1856, the Native Americans took a stand to try to withstand the what they considered the onslaught of the newcomers. And what that meant was they went to war. And unfortunately, the history shows that Native Americans were on the losing end of that stick, so to speak. And so they had lost one battle after the next, and next thing you know, they were pushed to what's known as Indian reservations. Indian reservations are, as you may or may not know, are agreements between the federal government and Native American tribes to essentially stay out of the way. You need to be put in this little corner so the real nice land can be developed by people who know how to work that land. So through the years, that's why you see these tribes are interspersed throughout the United States. Many times it's on barren lands or lands that are windy, lands that are very arid. But the good news of that is that, I'm looking at that's the perfect recipe for renewable energy. So anyway, if you want to invest, please talk to me afterward. But anyway, there's these native tribes throughout the years, right around about the year, 1950, they started the termination movement. And in this area, what that meant was a lot of tribes, even though they were pushed on reservations, they actually started to move into the cities, and that was actually by design. President Truman, right around about 1950, had strongly designed it so Native Americans would move into places like LA, Phoenix, Denver, Seattle. And so today there's, when you measure the percentage of Native Americans in the cities, it comes up to about 60%. So once we're Native Americans, largely on Native Americans on reservations, today they're actually in the cities. So in today's world, like in Seattle alone, we have about 3.3 million in this King County. Right in Seattle, we're almost getting up to 700,000. Right around about 5,400 Native Americans in this greater Seattle, but there's right around about 19,000 King County. So again, it's really hard to really know where they're at, but they are here. And people like myself are moving into the sectors, the urban sector, trying to make a difference, trying to provide services. That's why we're now working for, as Jamie indicated, for what's known as United Indians of All Tribes Foundation. Our design is we have 7 different functions, and we're very proud of them. We're very hardworking and determined, and we actually are hoping to enhance here soon. But the 7 functions essentially are we have a very strong art gallery, which we're just now getting off the ground. It's been in the works since actually in the 1970s, but as we want to start rebooting. We also have a youth home where we help the homeless. We also do workforce development work. We also do preschool work, working with the young children who are in ages 3 to 4. And we also have a young mothers, young parents, development system where we're providing early education. And we also have a homeless prevention program. And we also we feed the elders. So you can see we try to touch base with all of those. And we're really trying to make things in a much more cultural sense. Even though we've been culture since day one, since about 1975 when we opened the doors, we essentially want to again build on additional resources to make our services even stronger. So, without further ado, I guess I'll turn it back over to Jamie.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks so much. I'm good. I can just take that. Perfect. All right, so I've been given about 10 minutes to do 3 things, and then I'll turn us over to the plenary. I wanted to make a couple of introductions just so everyone had some faces to go with some names. I wanted to run through a couple logistical things that'll help make our next 3 days together go very smoothly. And then I wanted to set a little bit of context for both the plenary discussion that you're about to hear, as well as for the 3 days that we're all together. So if that's good, get comfortable. It'll get interesting again in about 9 minutes, okay? So the first group that I just want to make sure you all have names to go with faces are my colleagues at ArtPlace. So colleagues, when I call your names, if you just stand up and wave. So by the end of Wednesday, when we all leave, try and see as many of these people as possible. So Sarah Calderon and Justin Giles are 2 of our colleagues. Hello, Sarah and Justin. Liz Crane is somewhere in the room in the back, who their City Eye grantees know. Adam Erickson, Mari Garcia, and Sarah Westlake are our communications team, so pay attention to them. Sarah Westlake is hiding somewhere. Oh, there, waving next to Adam. Awesome. Jamie Hand and Danya Sherman are doing a lot of our research work, and they are here somewhere. Hello. And then the vast majority of you already know Lila Tamari and Javier Torres, who run the National Creative Placemaking Fund. Woohoo! There are also 3 artists that I want to single out because I want to make sure that their contributions to our time together don't go unnoted. One of them's here. I don't know that the other 2 are. The first is Louis Gong, and you all in your bag received this pin. And Louis Gong is Nooksack, and he's an artist who actually grew up in Northwest Washington and founded 8th Generation, which is a native-owned and operated business here in Seattle. And so they created these, and this is the work of Louis. So I want to make sure that's put into the room. The one person I think is here is Manuel Miranda. Is Manuel here somewhere? So Manuel is the designer who created the materials that you're looking at, the look of them, and we got to know him and many of his colleagues through work that AIGA was doing in New York after Superstorm Sandy, in Red Hook, in the Rockaways, and in Lower Manhattan. So I want to thank Manuel for his contributions to everything. And then the third artist is Angela Villalobos, who goes by the pseudonym 179, and she created the mural that's out in the lobby that is the map of the country with the state trees that all of the photographs are being hung on. And so I just want to make sure to say her name out loud in this room while we're together. So, all right, now for the exciting, clap for her. So now for the deeply annoying logistical part. So perk up for 90 seconds, all right? In order to be more sustainable, all of the material, all of the most up-to-date information is going to be on the app that we asked you to download, the guidebook app. For those of you who've been able to do it, thank you. For those of you whose things are still churning through trying to download it, I'm sorry, it'll get there. For anyone who's not able to download it, we will have paper copies of room locations and maps at the Hospitality Center, but also feel free to just ask your neighbor so that we're trying to minimize the amount of paper that we have. We do have free Wi-Fi. You'll see that on the bottom of the slides, and that will always be up there, along with the hashtag ArtPlace Summit. Use it only because we would love to try and aggregate as many of the photographs, as many of the stories, as much of the conversation that's going on after that. Everyone has a name tag, and on it is both the breakout sessions that you're signed up for. I am not allowed to change any of your breakout sessions, so don't ask me. Ask the very nice people who are going to be outside at the hospitality session. They'll do the best to accommodate you, but all of them are great. Just show up to one. The number on the front of your name tag is the number of the seminar group that you guys are going to be in. And I want to just take a minute on the off chance that everyone didn't read every single word of the materials you were sent to say a word about what these seminars are. So at this point, I'm pretty much a professional conference attendee, which means I'm regularly in ballrooms with 300 people. And so I've gotten deeply hungry for longer conversations with fewer people. And so when we were able to get Adam to join us from the Aspen Institute, one of the things he brought with him was the idea for these seminars, which are essentially ways of using great text as a springboard for great conversation. So each of you has been assigned to a group of about 25 people, And the idea is that once a day, today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, we'll come together in those small groups. We'll spend some time together with a text. We'll use it as a way to reflect on what we've been hearing, what we've been thinking. We'll use it as a way to project what we want to learn. But really, it's a way for us to come together and connect in small communities. So we would love for everyone to sort of participate fully in all three of those. The first is tonight. And as a bribe, we're doing it over dinner, which we will host. And the text that we're actually using is a poem by Elizabeth Alexander. And Elizabeth is an extraordinary poet who's now vice president at the Ford Foundation, and she'll actually be with us tomorrow. So there may be a pop quiz. So show up for that. So, all right. I now just want to take sort of 5 minutes to set a little bit of context for why we're here and what we at ArtPlace are going to ask of all of you guys, our community. Most of us in this room are here because we work deeply in a place, right? We are deeply committed to a community, and that is where we're doing our work. There are some of us, my colleagues and some other folks in this room, who sort of inhabit the privileged position of getting to look across the entire country. And what I'm going to ask, what I'm going to invite you to do, is for the next 2.5 days to sort of join us at that 30,000-foot level. And the reason I'm now going to lay out for you. When ArtPlace was chartered, we were actually chartered using the language of investment, right? We were chartered as a 10-year fund that will make investments between now and 2020. And at the end of that decade, at the end of that $150 million of investment, we will have created a set of equity, right? We'll have created a set of retained earnings. We'll have created the sort of extraordinary missions that all of you have been able to achieve in the work that you've been doing. And the idea is that at the end of our existence, just like at the end of any investment fund, we're going to take those retained earnings, we're going to take that knowledge, we're going to return it to all of the stakeholders, to those of you in this room, to our foundation partners, to our government partners, and then we're going to let all of those people be in charge of redeploying that, right? We think a lot, we talk a lot about sort of social impact investing, mission-based investing. So our mission, the things that we've been doing together, is that repositioning of arts and culture as a core sector of community planning and development. And so the return that we ultimately, as a united community, are seeking is the creation of that, right? A creation of a strong field of people who understand that arts and culture has to be a core sector of community planning and development. And we've been undertaking a strategic planning process, and as part of that, we got to sit down with each of our foundation partners on a one-on-one basis to talk to them about the work that we've been doing. And our colleagues at the Barr Foundation in Boston talked about the fact that philanthropy is often best at investing in the usual suspects, right? Philanthropy is really good at getting the usual suspects and giving them more. One of the things that I think we've done at ArtPlace is to totally flip that, right? Every one of you is here in this room because you're an unusual suspect, right? You want to work in a different way. You're hungry for tomorrow to be different than yesterday. You want to work with new colleagues. You want to bring more resources to bear. So the work ahead of us, the work that we have to make sure that we collectively get done in the next 3 years, is reaching back and getting our usual suspect colleagues. How do we go back home and get the garden variety colleagues who want to join us in what we're doing? And as I was thinking about that task, I thought back to a panel that we co-hosted with the American Planning Association about a week ago. And we have a colleague called Karen Atlas. And many folks in this room know Karen from her work in New York City on naturally occurring cultural districts and on participatory budgeting. But in this case, Karen was actually reflecting back on the time she spent working at Apple Shop and the time she spent, Apple Shop's in the house. Kentucky's in the house generally, right? And when she was talking about that, she said that one of the things she realized is that if what we actually care about is field building, right? If our goal is creating a field, a shared community, we need to stop celebrating our uniqueness and start celebrating our influences. And this is something that Karen said to me before, and I haven't been able to hear it. And for whatever reason, a week ago, where I was, where she was, how she said it, it actually sank in on me. That if what we care about is field building, we have to stop celebrating our uniqueness, stop celebrating our difference, and start celebrating our influence, start celebrating what we have in common. So the narrative that I've been thinking about our work and about us as a community is the fact that artists have been a part of communities coming together for at least 20,000 years, right? If we think about the caves of Lascaux, some of the earliest recorded history we have, those communities were literally bounded by images of people's collective experience, right? That's arts and culture. So the lines of that community were literally being drawn by artists. So that work is ancient. So why did we need this creative placemaking phrase? Why did we need to sort of bring ArtPlace into existence? I think it's because that work has not always been visible. That work has not always been legible to government, to philanthropy, and to policymakers. They didn't always understand it in a way that they could support, invest in it, and continue it and further it. So what we've been trying to do is to think about how we can help make that work visible, how we can help make that work legible. And that's why we've talked about adopting the language of community planning and development and those outcomes, right? The reason that we're doing that is not to essentialize artists, is not to put arts and culture in a narrow silo, but is actually to help create on-ramps for government philanthropy and policy to understand what's happening and has always been happening in our communities organically. So we're gathered today to celebrate what we have in common, right? I'd like us to spend today, tomorrow, and Wednesday thinking about our influences, thinking about our connections, and thinking about what unites us. And I would ask you to maybe, if it resonates at all with you, to sit with that Karen Atlas quote and to think about when we want to celebrate our uniqueness and when we want to celebrate our influences. And that is a very poetic prelude that I put together to help invite up the first conversation that's going to kick us off. So at this point, I am going to turn the stage over to three amazing colleagues. The conversation will be chaired by Josephine Ramirez, who many of you know has a strong and deep background in arts and culture, including in King County. And she's now a portfolio director at the Irvine Foundation, figuring out how we can increase political and economic opportunity for the working poor of California. And she'll be joined by Maurice Jones, CEO of LISC, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, and also proudly, newly again, a board member of the Norfolk, Virginia Arts Festival, which received ArtPlace funding a couple years ago for some of the partnerships and works it was doing with a neighboring public housing authority. And Chris Masingill, who was appointed by President Obama and continues to serve in the current administration as the federal co-chairman of the Delta Regional Authority, which serves the 8-state Delta region of Alabama, Arkansas, Illinois, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, and Tennessee. So with that, please help me make Josephine, Maurice, and Chris feel welcome.
So glad to be here. It's really great being in my not my original home country. I was joking around with these guys, talking with these guys in their southern accents. It makes the native Texan come out in me. So you might hear some of that. I'm not sure. But I'm actually pretty much Californian now, and I'd like to give a big shout out to Blue Lake. Hey, Blue Lake. Anyway, we will get to business now. Thank you, Jamie. Jamie helped me think through some of the questions and the approach to the honor it is for me to talk to these two guys. So thank you for helping me think through stuff. And just shout out to so many wonderful colleagues in the room that I've had for so many years. It's just a blessing to be here again. So with Maurice and Chris, our two distinguished gentlemen to my left, we're going to try to as Jamie said, lift up the conversation to this sort of field level so that we can all kind of get out of the trenches for a second and breathe and sort of see across the field and have a conversation with two folks that have a deep core value that we share about the role of arts and culture, but who also have extensive history and expertise in their fields of economic development and community revitalization. Saying that right? Okay. I am going to interrupt them if they talk too long, though.
Good.
And we had talked a little bit about kicking off the discussion with some kind of anecdote that you can share. We know that you're supporters and you value the arts, but everyone kind of evolves in that understanding of how it connects to the work that you do. And I'm wondering if each of you can tell a quick story about, how you started to make the connection between sort of arts and culture in your own lived experience and the ways that you see the value and the weight of that actually connecting in a deep way with your work.
You want to start first? Youngest goes first.
Oh, whoa. Well, let me do it in this context. First and foremost, real quickly, I want to say how honored I am, Jamie, to get to participate and to be a part of such an amazing group of folks. You all are actually helping to refuel my tank, right? Because in the world that I live every day, it can be difficult because we're in the trenches trying to do traditional economic development, but yet be innovative and outside of the box and be a champion for all kinds of stuff. And sometimes that can be complicated, particularly when you represent a part of the country that I do, and we'll talk more about that. But I want to say what an honor it is to be on the stage with such incredible people. Josephine, your work of what you're doing, the foundation in California, and Maurice, I want to tell you in front of all these incredible people, I've seen the impact of rural LISC in my footprint. Even before doing this job and as a practicing economic developer, what you and your organization do for my people and our part of the country is very important, and I want to say thank you for that very much.
You can stop right there, Chris.
Look, I got to give credit where credit is due. They help change
I like
people's
your
lives.
answer.
It's very important. So don't ever take away the rural aspect of what you guys do. It's too important. But to your question, one is I've always had an appreciation and affection for arts and culture. One is as a kid, when I was a kid growing up, I had dyslexia, still do. I can barely write my own name. And the cool thing is that I found myself always surrounded by folks who were very inclusive. And it just so happened to be that was a community filled with highly intellectual folks, artist community, theater folks who really appreciated everybody's differences. So I always had that to kind of fall back onto that spurred a little bit of that. But when you become an economic developer, I'm not an artist. I'm not a historian. And when you step into the world of economic development, you are trained a very specific way. It is about smokestacks. It's about relocation. Sometimes it's about stealing somebody else's jobs and bringing them to your community, although we don't like to really talk about that sometimes. Mm-hmm. And for the first part of my professional career, both in and out of government and economic development, and you chief man, you know what that's like, putting incentives on the table and trying to attract that traditional aspect. But as I got more mature in my job, once I had the ability not to be so focused on going after and trying to relocate industries or to do it in that traditional sense of manufacturing and industrial base, I had an opportunity to see some local, what I'd call creative placemaking. And of course, back then we didn't really have a name for it, but it was place-based, it was good stuff, it made everybody feel good, you could see the impact that it would have at the local level. And so fast forward a little bit. I get an opportunity to do this work in a place that is one of the most historic and iconic places in America, where we have unbelievable bounty of natural resources, we also equal that impact and contribution on music, literature, our history in the Delta region, our food. Many of you all come to our part of the world to enjoy many of those things. And as I started understanding the value of that through the lens of economic development, when you're sitting down with site selectors and you're really trying to close the deal, it's always been about workforce training and education. That's the number one thing that drives economic development. But everything being even, you start engaging in conversations about the quality of place and how important that has become over the last several years. And you realize very quickly that when you're trying to recruit professionals, when you're trying to recruit CEOs, when you're trying to expand that economic base, once you get past of talking about the business model, once you start looking at the numbers and cents and they start making those evaluations with everything being equal, it very quickly turns to placemaking. And it is truly impacting how decisions are made by HR managers and CEOs and presidents. And the other reality is that for rural America, for the Delta region, quite frankly, this is a vehicle for us to protect rural way of life, to grow the sustainability and opportunities. I see creative placemaking as a true tool for job creation. And it's part of my responsibility that I've made a commitment to help change that discussion with practitioners, to get them to understand that this is an incredible, powerful tool. And not only do you need a seat at the table, it needs to be bigger than that. Economic developers and the arts and culture community, we need to be driving this, right? It needs to be second nature about how we do economic development strategy at the local level.
So I'm gonna, because I want you to save that for later.
Got plenty. I got to get warmed up a little bit.
So the evolution was from, just straight ahead, no frills, economic development to seeing or experiencing the deepening of what it means to have something to develop for, right? So what's your response?
Well, let me add on to that. So the job I had before this, when I was, as Chris mentioned, I was the Commerce Secretary for Virginia. And one of the things that Virginia has done with help from outsiders is we have created a number of trails, we call them. In this case, one that really, really moved me was something we call the Crooked Road Music Trail, which is, it celebrates the culture and music and life of southwestern Virginia, which is Appalachia, it is coal country. And to sort of cut to the chase, today, what that Crooked Road Music Trail is a network of performance venues, music venues, bluegrass and country, etc. It's a connection between these music venues that spans about 19 different counties out in Southwest Virginia and literally brings in almost $10 million a year in economic benefit for those rural, hard-hit counties in Virginia. And so what I saw was, first and foremost, art and artists telling the stories largely through music of this part of the country, of this part of our state, preserving it and disseminating it to a wide audience, right? And really creating a sense of pride in a part of Virginia right now that is the most economically strapped. That's one. The second thing that I saw, though, is just a literal transformation of the place, because we were trying to bring in visitors. And so you had theaters that were literally brought back to life, that had been allowed to go untended to for quite some time. And you had places where music used to be performed that people rediscovered, and porches of people's homes became venues for music again. And so you had a physical transformation of the place. And then in the end, you had hardcore economic development. Mm-hmm. This money is sustaining over 100 jobs a year in a place that is losing jobs by the thousands to what's happening with coal. And so that sort of experience for me, not the first, but one that really for me hit home, that art and artist and culture is core and an incredibly vital strategy to help transform communities and neighborhoods that are trying to figure out what their sweet spot will be in the 21st century. And I saw it, that's a largely rural example, but I see it in urban examples too. But that one for me really taught the lesson that we needed to make sure we were leveraging art and culture to help transform communities.
Something you said we had a conversation to just hear each other's voices before we met one another on the phone, and Maurice was talking about, you can see that this theme is one country, indivisible, trying to relate to that somehow, but I think what we started talking about in the conversation was something that Maurice said, was that a large part of what we think divides us are actually, a perception. That the differences between rural and urban and different. Well, you should just share that thought because it was so eloquent.
And because I'm getting older, I won't remember it all. But let me make it up at least in that. Look, I'm a child of the South. I'm a country boy. I was born and raised in a 1,200 person place, and I was a tobacco farmer until I was 22. I tell everybody that if you want to inspire a child to go to college, you put him in the tobacco field. He'll go to college. But what I see, and particularly in the work we're doing at LISC now, is just how common the themes are, how harmonious the themes are between urban and rural. And by the way, how harmonious the challenges are, right? We have workforce challenges in rural America. We have serious workforce challenges in urban America. We have education challenges. We have infrastructure challenges. Now, infrastructure in urban America may be roads, right? It may be public transit. In rural America, it's broadband, right? That's right. So absolutely. You may have the themes are the same. And yet on this piece that we're talking about today, the other thing that for me, that I've seen is the assets around culture and art are as strong in urban America as they are in rural America, and as strong in rural America as they are in urban. So what I see is more in common between urban and rural than what divides us. You got the same challenges, but you also have many of the same assets, particularly in both places. This art and culture is underinvested. No question about it. So what I would like to see us do is really, really focus on how we leverage this particular asset that we know is present in both urban and rural America. And by the way, there are a few things, right? Sports and art and culture are some of the most harmonizing agents that we have, right? where else will you get grown adults standing up doing waves and dancing when they don't really have a beat? I didn't say anything about you, Chris. I didn't say a word.
I can do a backspin like nobody's business.
But we know that these are also I used to sing in church, and we always knew that when we were singing, you were also having an experience, and that experience was one that was hard to just capture in mortal terms, if you will. There was something divine about it, and so I think it's something the country just has has not understood as greatly as we want.
Something you were saying too about the was it the Crooked Trail? Is that what it's called?
Crooked Road. Yeah.
Crooked Road. That the pride in place that started to happen. I'm sure you've seen similar kind of thing. It sort of surfaces an asset in place that was always there, right?
I was in Brooklyn, and there was a mural that was painted close to a community facility that we helped to finance, and there was some worry that this mural would be painted on or used by gangs to market. You can walk through this neighborhood, and the one thing that is untouched by anybody is this mural that was painted by both an artist and children in the neighborhood, and everybody knows it. That's not an accident. There's a reason for that.
And we've talked about, and I probably there's as many witnesses to that, the power of that kind of work in community as there are people in this room. I mean, we're believers here. I kind of wanted to sort of flip that over, something that Chris had said too about translating that, because those are anecdotes that we all know and have experienced, but translating what that means to, your peers, right, in economic development. I mean, you had a good critical shot in the arm for us on that, and I think it would be great to hear that again.
Well, let me piggyback off on something that Maurice said that actually touches on three things that I would contribute to this piece here. One is that you got to understand that this has been a full circle for me. It's hard to take that economic development hat off in a minute. And Maurice can understand that because there's so much pressure on, particularly in rural America. We've had this school of thought for almost 3 decades. Let's build an industrial park. Let's get a big auto manufacturer, and all of our problems are solved. Well, that's not the reality. And not every community is going to get a Toyota plant or a Big River Steel, as in the case in my part of the world. We're very thankful, and don't misunderstand me. That is critically important to growing your economic base. Okay. But what is also important, to a point that you made, and thank you for teeing this up, because what we now know by seeing how jobs are created, seeing the impact of various types of jobs, seeing the connection, the urban-rural connection, when there is a greater connectivity with urban America and rural America, guess what happens? GDP goes up, salaries go up, infrastructure goes up, the connection that rural and urban has for healthcare, workforce, innovation, those things are truly tied together. In fact, now we know more than we have in years the opportunity to expand that economic opportunity when those connections are the strongest. The other thing that I would mention about this that I think is critically important, almost how I got started with this conversation, in that because there is such a focus from a governor all the way down to a local mayor or a county judge about going after that traditional piece, sometimes they forget about one of the most incredible assets right there in front of them. Jamie, something that you contributed to one of the IEDC pieces that they put out a couple of years ago on creative placemaking, which was fantastic. One of the things that has contributed for me as an economic developer is going, look, there are strategies to do this. the number one responsibility of an EDO or an economic development organization is to connect with arts and culture and create a common language. Maurice, you actually alluded to it. When we're talking about that impact, leveraging the power of what you all are doing every day, you are true community champions, building on the power of your influences every day. But what happens in our part of the world, it is very much, we have my box, you have your box. Sometimes we can do things together because we're supporting the community, and your local arts council or your regional group can put something together and everybody loves it, makes everybody feel good. But we all go back to our individual corners and we're doing A, B, and C. And the reality is that when you are planning, particularly in rural America, I represent 8 states, 252 counties and parishes, 10 million people in one of the most under-resourced and impoverished places in the country. 92% of all of our counties are distressed. 55% of my people live in some of the persistent poverties in the nation. If you are a child born in the Delta Regional Authority footprint, guess what? You will die before somebody outside of our footprint. That's not my numbers. That's Health and Human Services numbers. And the reason that that is important in the context of this conversation is that this is truly about recognizing the assets, the tools that we have to put in place for our own future. And what has hit me like a lead balloon is that I feel some responsibility now because I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. I mean, look, I almost want to be evangelical when it comes to this kind of stuff, right? Because in our part of the world, tourism and the arts and culture has always been a part of our DNA. I mean, we're the home of blues, every major form of music that we listen to outside of your culture, sorry, but although this is very important because we've even been influenced by so many other cultures, but yet when you look at some of the greatest in music, where are their roots? In the Delta region. So we've been very accustomed to the tourism and our arts and culture, but what we have not done is that we have not doubled down and made this a part of our DNA about leveraging local assets for community and economic development. Being intentional, but in a way that we are scaling that intentionality and integrating it into community and economic development. First things first. Many community leaders, elected officials, practitioners, we have no concept on how to do that. A local mayor sees an individual project, it is a cool project. But getting them to understand the connection and weaving that into, hey, this is actually job creation. This is not just creative entrepreneurship, this is actually entrepreneurship. This is actually small business development. You can do that. You can take your downtown small rural community and put in place the kind of projects that ArtPlace has been funding and scale that in a way where you're not only touching public safety, infrastructure, transportation, all those things that we as economic developers, we try to be so exclusive and that I'm the only job creator in our community. That's the feel-good humanities. That's for the affluent. Well, the reality is that in Clarksdale, Mississippi, one of the first ArtPlace projects that they funded in Mississippi was the Crossroads Culture Center. Tim Lincoln, where's Tim? I know that you were here. Where were you, Tim? Mm-hmm. This gentleman right here is fighting that fight every day. But one of the things that, and I'm sure we're going to get to this, but I don't want to transition yet because
I want you to tell us. I want you to tell us.
You've touched on something about this
You're on
common
fire.
language.
First of all, somebody say amen so far.
No.
Okay.
Look,
but I want you to tell us.
I've got the offering plate, though. I've got the offering.
I want you to tell us what we can do better. You know, that's we're all here because we believe in that gospel, right? And what would be really helpful for us is to hear from you, like, what are we doing wrong? Why aren't we having more of an impact in the way we communicate with your fields so that other folks like you can be preaching to us too.
With economic development, with government, and with...
Well, I
From
think
your
Maurice
perspective.
touched on something that was very important, and I'm going to, again, Jamie, that piece that you contributed, I'm referencing that again because in the world of economic development, there's something called IEDC, that's the International Economic Development Council, and they are the leading trade organization for practitioners. And this is even new to them. This has been fairly recent. This piece that I keep on referencing came out in 2015 that Jamie contributed to and actually talked about 5 different strategies from anchoring to fixing to planning. Huge impact, huge impact. But part of that commonality that you all as the soldiers and advocates engaging with your local economic developer, if you have one in rural America, I mean, in my footprint, sometimes even our mayors are part-time. Okay? We don't even have full-time mayors. And we're trying to do community and economic development. So the real leaders, the change agents for economic and community development are individuals just like you because you love your community and your people. But this common language is important. Maurice touched on it a while ago when he started talking about the number of jobs with the music trail that he was talking about. If you look at the numbers, and you use this, when you go back and you see your mayor, if you're in the South or in rural America, you remind them that some of the recent studies or economic analysis, $698 billion of arts and cultural production to America's GDP. All right, now let's take that one step further. For economic developers, for mayors, for community folks, at the end of the day, it's about the bottom line pieces. You got to put it in their language and how they understand. But what does that mean to your treasurer, Mayor? Well, let's think about the contributions to payroll. That GDP that I just mentioned, that's over 4% of GDP in the United States. Arts and culture contributed more than manufacturing and warehousing. Now, you don't hear the president talk about that very often. Please don't tell him I said that.
CNN is with us.
Some things you just got to own. And I own it because for me, this is real practical. You're talking about over $334 billion in payroll, in compensation. So what does that mean? Going to the grocery store, buying houses, employing people in local communities. And guess what? Small businesses stay connected to a community more than sometimes major manufacturing. Why? Because you're invested in that community. That's the kind of language that we have to be talking about when you're working on these projects and trying to not only get resources, but who's the best that's going to know about tax credits, bonding, unique, innovative financing? That's economic developers. We should be natural partners about how to complete some of these projects in much bigger ways.
Yeah. I'm glad we're on CNN because I don't think I wrote all that down. Those are good. Those are good.
Well, Alex
But,
Holland and my staff, she's the one who helps educate me on all this. Alex, wave, everybody.
What would you say to that? How could we do what we do better to translate the value of creative placemaking into community revitalization?
So nothing substitutes for people being able to see the work.
Great point.
Right? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what we need to do as people who believe in the power of creative placemaking is we have got to collectively reach out to a broader audience to enlighten them, right? We've got to bring them to the work, right? And so, yes, government officials and economic development officials, but the technology community needs to know what creative placemaking is doing around the country and helping people transform their lives, right? Certainly the philanthropic community needs to know, but folks who are and the high net worth community who are looking for places to make bets on those things that we've got to get these people here. So one of the things that I think we have to do is, and I think Jamie hit on this, we've got to talk to a more diverse crowd and get them to experience. Once they experience the work, it is hard for them not to be moved, right? Once you go and follow a few stops on whether it be the Crooked Road Musical Heritage Trail, or there's an organization that LISC works with in North Minneapolis, Juxtaposition, which is a husband-wife team who have they've basically taken their love of art and design, and they've created multiple enterprises at an intersection and have completely started the revamping of a whole corridor. Right? Once people see that and understand it, the case is easy to be made. I think we're dealing more with folks being unaware, more folks being unaware. The economic development officials get this stuff. I mean, they know that visitors spending money in your community is what you want. But we've got to reach much broader than that. So I think part of what we've got to do is we've got to stop talking to the same crowd,
Right.
and reach out to a new crowd.
Yeah, I'm hearing that it's sort of like, we have to have the facts about what's relevant to the folks that are trying to develop better economic environments for people. And we have to maybe use that as a way to get people to see it and experience it, because we know that, once people's emotions are touched, all the other stuff, sort of follows. Yeah. But you got to have both to make the argument.
There is a worldwide movement going on right now in corporate America that they're calling corporate social responsibility, right? But corporate social responsibility, they are focused on a handful of the same stuff, right? The same stuff that everybody else is focusing on. And our job is to unrelentingly chase them to come and see the work that artists are doing in our communities and the influence that it's having in helping to transform them in a sustainable way. I think I'm optimistic. I think we've got unbelievable opportunity, but I'm also aware that we shouldn't be sleeping. We should be going after this stuff with urgency, because people are they are developing points of views about where they should make their bets without being sufficiently informed about this one.
Great.
And
I hope nobody's sleeping in this room.
Nobody.
I wanted to, because I do want to save some time for folks to ask questions, and especially to that point, I think, I've been having some conversations with folks in the room about how to better make use of this trend for corporate social responsibility. We've seen it before, but we need to come back at it with a renewed sense of argument. But I wanted to turn a little bit. I think what we've been doing in creative placemaking, and what I'm calling creative placemaking 1.0 and 2.0, is kind of this nascent or this emerging field of practitioners reaching to your fields to say, we have these approaches, this treasure that can grow the economy, that can boost tourism, that can increase public safety, that can do all of these things for the communities that we serve. And then I reflect on, what the entities that we represent do. We invest in communities that are living in or near poverty. We want to make their lives better. We at least want to improve the quality of their lives and their circumstance. And if they actually get out of poverty, that's even better. We love that. But a large investment goes into like creating a better set of circumstances for folks that are living in or near poverty. So we have this creative placemaking 1 and 2.0 where we've had this discussion. We're doing some awesome work. That's why we're here. We'll keep doing it. We're trying to learn to translate better and to bring people, to church, and so they'll believe about all this work. And I just want to imagine with you for a second what I'm thinking could be creative placemaking 3.0, which is drawing on the foundational aspect of what arts and culture in everyday life does for people. And if you're talking about improving the lives of folks that are living in these communities that we care about, how can we bring that sort of deeper definition of improving their lives just because arts and cultural practices do that? In addition to all of these other effects where we amplify, greater tourism, hard skills that lead to jobs, we can do all that too. But how do we move into the next evolution of our field, where we kind of bring what we all know as the power of arts and culture just to make life better for people here and now, because it exercises our ability to imagine and to envision hope and to envision a different future. So that's a little more soft, right? That's a much more difficult thing to translate to folks. And I'd love to hear, kind of along the lines of what you're talking about with the more sort of hard-edged kinds of things that we can bring to your fields. How can we ask you to come to our side a little bit and help us translate that simple power of arts and culture in people's lives that is not necessarily directly about those economic and community development pieces? Am I making sense? I mean, and this is a hard question to ask, and I think it's always on the minds of people who work in this field.
The demands on resources, I think, have never been more challenging on public resources, on the triple bottom line, trying to get access to that. So I would encourage us to do 3 things. 1, I think we have to change the narrative. I fundamentally think we have to change the narrative. And what I mean by that is that, and you alluded to this, Maurice, arts and culture, we associate that with creativity. Yes, it's creativity, but when you're dealing with the private sector, the business component, the narrative needs to be attached to the triple bottom line. It's not just speaking it in their language, but it's taking your language and then making it powerful to them. So you're changing the narrative that you care about your community like I do. Your community investors by the nature of your DNA, but taking that a step further and creating that narrative where this is business. And it's the business of creativity. It's the business of art and culture. It's the economic impact to how they can be successful with growing their bottom line and then also get the benefits of community investing. It's not just about creativity and the humanities and wow, that's an incredible art project. It is bigger than that. This is about survival for rural America. This is about increasing opportunities. This is how you can deploy a strategy to address various issues in your community, from job creation to workforce training to infrastructure, public safety. This is one of the tools in your tool chest. The second component is, I think that we have to recruit other types of advocates. I think you need to find folks outside of the sector to be able to be those ombudsmen, those ambassadors for the community that takes an invested interest. And I'll give you case in point. El Dorado, Arkansas, Union County, South Arkansas, it's in our footprint. They're taking on about, who knows what the final number is truly going to be, but it's about a $30-40 million, it would fit the definition of arts and culture in some incredible ways. They're renovating the old Rialto Theater. They're creating an arts and entertainment district, outdoor amphitheater for 3,600 people. This is a community of 20,000. 9,000 seat auditorium, maker space, kids space, all these unbelievable things. But it is being driven by the CEO of Murphy Oil. Because he gets this, because he's tired of losing top talent, because it was about human capital. So for him, this was like, look, this is impacting my business for the next 25 years. Because they want amenities. They want what we call value-added opportunities for families. And then lastly, I think you have to be much more vocal about being at the table. Because it is not in the nature of a local mayor or a chamber president or an economic developer to just do that naturally. We're not there yet. In our part of the world, we're not there yet. Because many of these projects are siloed or one-off. They're not integrated to the community's long-term economic development strategy. When the community puts together their strategy and they're having these individual components and they're addressing workforce training and education, not many of them are talking about how art and culture actually impacts workforce training and education.
Right.
That'd be my take.
So I want to make sure that though I'm with you. You're also asking about sort of quality of life and the role that art and culture can play there, irrespective of the, for example, economic development.
If you think about, people who are living paycheck to paycheck don't have the bandwidth often to dream about how their lives could change. So there's these practices that experts like these in the field have to provide the exercise of creativity and imagination just in everyday life that boosts the quality of life, that improves their lives as they are. It's not about giving them a job, but it's about giving them the room to be dreamers. I can't, it's hard for me to articulate.
Nope, I'm with you.
Maybe that's unrealistic. Maybe we can't ever fit that value into your work.
I think that is already part of the work, and I'm reminded of when we are talking about creative placemaking. What we're talking about in a lot of cases is capturing and helping to develop the creative talent of people who are living in underinvested neighborhoods and showing folks that they actually do have talent that is valued both within the neighborhood and without, and that can be a building block for the future, right? And so on the eastern shore of Virginia, we have a number of people who are keeping alive a way of singing that is basically dying, right? And they are recording the way that songs were sung years ago, and it is doing a lot of things. First of all, it is creating this sense of, you know what, we didn't know this was special. This was just part of what we do. But we're capturing it. It's a part of our story. It actually has forced people to learn more about their story. But there are outsiders who value this as well. And so here you have a place that is poor by most economic standards that we use in the country today, but yet has this unique asset that, frankly, almost everybody in the community can do because it was part of their experience. I think you see that in neighborhoods, both urban and rural, all over, whether it's murals that are being painted, or music that is being made.
Urban dance forms.
Urban dance forms. What you have is you have a recognition of a unique talent that can give people a sense of, we do have a strength here that we can build on. But you can also give the community a sense of pride about something that few other places have. And, you know, you've always needed, or art in particular has always been just a source of joy, right? It's always been something that, when you've got a group of folks singing together or painting together or doing some kind of artistic endeavor together, even in the toughest of circumstances, right? It was always something that was able to lift people above those circumstances, if only for a moment, right? And they would get joy from it. And a neighborhood with no art is definitely a neighborhood at risk of having little joy, right? And so that is something that we've got to make sure, look, it goes way back, right? In this country, the songs of slaves are some of the most powerful things that enabled them to endure, right? What they were going through. It's a similar analogy today. The art that we have present in all of our neighborhoods, just for the sake of the neighborhood and people's souls within the neighborhood, is something that we need to capture and lift up. If it does nothing else.
It's a real, thank you, ripe place for us as a field to figure out, like, how do we make more sense of that for other people? I mean, again, like I said, in addition to all the great work that we're doing in terms of making clearer what the impact has to do with other kinds of social good.
I think people, scholars and academics are onto this stuff, right? They're trying
There's
to
some
highlight those things that, you have this great debate about what role religion plays in people's lives versus other things. It's the same thing. This issue of what role art can play in your life in giving you resilience.
That's very
That's
big
what our
that
community,
resilience piece is important.
our art is useful for our communities, if for nothing else, than the resilience that it can give.
Oh, that's a good tweet, Jamie.
It is.
Jamie, just make sure you
good.
give it to LISC. Give it to LISC.
And it happens to be true. Even better.
So we do have a few minutes left. I'm wondering
this our
if
clock
we
here?
could take
Is
a
this-
couple of questions.
Got the yellow on us.
If something's coming up for you that you want to talk about.
Mike. We put them to sleep.
First hand over here.
Hi. in reference to the corporate social giving and the usual suspects, I think our group has found in our community, which is Montgomery, Alabama, and there's probably some commonality amongst all the communities that we represent here. There's a perception that when we go after those usual suspects, whether it be corporate donors or the affluent or anyone else, that we're taking money from those usual suspects, and the our usual suspects would be the fine arts, the symphony, some of the more established capital F, capital A fine arts organizations in our city. How do we, I know we need to expand our demographic and reach beyond those groups, but how do we communicate that by dispersing their efforts across the board from the established organizations to some of the more upstarts, that rather than cutting the pie into smaller slices, we're actually maybe baking a larger pie for everyone?
I think you speak the language that corporations understand. They understand that you need to diversify your lines of business. They understand that you have to invest in the legacy pieces of their business and startups and innovation simultaneously, that the seasons for doing those are not separate. You've got to do them all at the same time, because you need to be building for the future as well as sustaining what you have now. I think you've got to speak to them about your value proposition in a language that they understand. And this is, I think, our opportunity is we've got to learn new languages, right? If we're going to court new partners, we've got to learn new languages, right? And I think that's our invitation. But they'll get that if we can put it in their language, and we can do that.
Thank you. Anyone else here? At the back, and then Polly. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, it's Darren. Hi, Darren.
Who was that back there?
Darren Isom.
Oh, hello.
It's Darren Isom.
How are you?
How are you?
Good.
How are you? I'm doing grant making and music in the arts in the Mid-South in Memphis. And you alluded to something that's really weighs on me heavily. I think there's a fundamental disconnect in how communities actually talk about the arts and the role of the arts. And I think that in wealthier communities, white and black, we see the arts as kind of this distraction. It's what you do when you have a little extra time, extra money, you put your kids in a fancy class. And it's this accessory piece that you achieve after you've done everything else. Whereas in low-income black communities and Latino communities in the Mid-South, art is how you navigate life. It's there. So you talked about slaves and the slave songs, like as slaves were in the back singing what would become gospel, right? As a way of navigating life.
Right.
You had whites in the plantations having a harp player kind of play through dinner, right. And that was how they define art. In one community, define art completely differently. And so my question for you is, how do we bridge those very different definitions? Because I think that very often we find ourselves, particularly those that are in community development, talking about bringing arts to neighborhoods. Poor black people have been on the avant-garde of every artistic movement in this country's history. You're not going to bring them anything, right? So I think that you have to figure out what exactly do they have as an asset that you can take advantage of and allow them to leverage as their asset that's unique to them, and position that. Artists in poor communities, they're business owners, right? That mom and pops that's selling the fried catfish out the back of her house, she's a restaurant owner, right? Like there's something there. They've learned these artistic skills, or they've honed these artistic skills as a way of navigating a life in a way they've been neglected. Art is a form of navigating oppression, which is why it's rich, which is a problem, right? But it's another conversation for another day over cocktails. But so I'm just figuring out, how do we talk about those various definitions in a way that honors what art is within the low-income community or in impoverished neighborhoods and communities, and positions actually leveraging that asset as a way of bringing about community development and community impact?
Well, I think you just did it. I don't know that I could add anything to it. I think the opportunity for us is to make sure we're comprehensive in our portrayal of what this investment in art and culture in all communities, but particularly underinvested communities, can do. And it's all of the above, right? It is, in fact, an economic development asset. And by the way, those new businesses, juxtaposition that I mentioned, it pays taxes in Minnesota, right? It is a corporate taxpayer. I think that we've got to make sure we're talking about it comprehensively, that we definitely talk about the economic development aspects of it, but we also talk about this piece that I just talked about, which is that it holds, there is the development, the divinity almost of it is something that has long been understood by the communities and those others who actually look at the communities through critical eyes. And we lose that, and America loses. But I think you just did it. That's the way I would do it, so I should have taped that.
Chris, do you want to wrap up?
Add, in the practical terms, you need to come to your policymakers, your politicians, your economic developers as problem solvers. You have the solution. There is no more powerful tool for an economic developer than utilizing the platform of art and culture to talk about equality and inclusion. Because in communities, particularly in the rural South, when we're dealing with these issues that are still prevalent and we're trying to be job creators, if we have a vehicle to actually talk about inclusion in some meaningful ways, to talk about equality in the terms of making that a part of your economic development strategy, that is powerful. And there is no greater powerful tool than to talk about equality and equity and inclusion through arts and culture. And that is a solution.
I'll just add one other thing, right? When you go to these performance venues, by the way, where artists of color are reading their poetry or performing their music, the audience is likely to be overwhelmingly white, right? So the fact of the matter is that audience is already there, right? And if folks are not seeing that, again, they're not observing, they're not experiencing the art. But the fact is, art is among the few things that brings us all together, black, white, rich and poor, urban and rural. And that is, the more that this country has of that, and the more that we are investing in it, the stronger we'll be as a country. No question about it.
Gosh,
And I can't think of a better way to end a panel that was about one country, indivisible.
Oh,
Can you?
it's a setup.
Thank you.
Chris, good to see you, man. Thanks.